They fought the British people. They even won their freedom. But then the strangest thing occurred. They signed a treaty dictating the terms of the British. Today's question: were the Maroon people heroes as we know them, or traitors as per modern history? Welcome. On today's episode of Questions History, we ask 5 questions to the Maroon people. The first question we ask is the what, the where, the why, what happened, and why is it important today? Journey with us as we uncover our history. Our story takes place in 18th century Jamaica, during one of the most intense periods of resistance in the island's history. By this time, Jamaica was firmly under the British control. Plantations dominated the economy, and thousands of enslaved Africans were forced to work under brutal conditions. But not everyone stayed. Some escaped. Some fled into the mountains, into the forests, into the unknown. And they built something new. These were known as the Maroons, independent communities formed by formerly enslaved Africans who refused to live under colonial rule. Among them was a powerful leader, Kojo, as we know him today as Kojo of the Maroons. From the rugged terrain of western Jamaica, Kojo and his people waged a long and effective resistance against British forces. This conflict became known as the First Maroon War. For years, the British tried and failed to defeat them. Until 1739, that was the year that everything changed. Because instead of winning the war completely, the Maroons made a deal. A treaty with the British. They would be free. But there were conditions. And those conditions would defy how history remembers them. This matters today because the Maroons are celebrated as freedom fighters. But their treaty raises a difficult question. Freedom for themselves? At what cost? We saw that the year was 1739 when the British finally agreed that winning this war would be pointless, and signing a treaty instead would be more beneficial. But what was the cost and the condition of this treaty? Join us to answer question 2, where we examine the background of the conflict and its most important players. Journey. To understand the Maroons, you would have to understand the system they were escaping. Jamaica in the early 1700s was one of the most brutal plantation societies in the Caribbean. Enslaved Africans vastly outnumbered the white colonial population, but control was maintained through force, fear, and harsh punishment. The island's geography created an opportunity. Mountains, dense forests, hidden valleys. For those who escaped, the land itself became protection. Over time, these escapees form an organized community, self-sufficient, strategic, and deeply connected to African traditions. Two major groups emerge: the Leeward Maroons in the west, led by Kojo, and the Windward Maroons in the east, associated with leaders like Nani of the Maroons and figures such as Kwako. These were not scattered fugitives. They were organized and they resisted. They knew the land better than the British. They used guerrilla tactics. They struck quickly and disappeared in thin air. The British considered them a threat. The enslaved called them hope. We saw the introduction of many of our folk heroes and some actual national heroes. Kojo, Kwako, and Nani of the Maroon. We also saw that they used guerrilla tactics and warfare. We saw that they fought for their freedom. But let's join us in answering question 3. What escalated the conflict? Join us. The conflict escalated because the Maroons were not just surviving, they were winning. Plantations were attacked. Property was destroyed. Enslaved people were freed. And most importantly, the Maroons could not be captured. British troops, trained for conventional warfare, struggled in the mountainous terrains of Jamaica. The Maroons turned the landscape into a weapon. Ambushes, traps, sudden strikes. The longer the war went on, the more it was exposed as a dangerous truth that the British were not in full control of Jamaica. And that terrified them. Because if the Maroons could resist successfully, others might follow. So the British escalated their efforts, sending more troops, offering more rewards, and increasing the pressure. But still, no victory until they changed their strategy. Instead of defeating the Maroons, they decide to negotiate. To summarize question 3, we saw where the British, who were used to conventional warfare, simply were overwhelmed by the Maroons and their guerrilla warfare and tactics. But let's examine question 4. What were the key moments, turning points, and major decisions in this conflict journey? The most important turning point came in 1739. After years of conflict, the British and the Leeward Maroons, led by Kojo, signed a treaty. On the surface, it looked like a victory for the Maroons. They were granted freedom. They were given land. They were allowed to govern themselves. But there was a catch. One critical condition. Maroons agreed to stop attacking plantations and to return runaway enslaved people. That clause changed everything. Because now, the same group that had once offered escape and resistance was required to help maintain the system that had fought against them. For some, this was a strategic move, a way to secure survival in a powerful empire. For others, it was a betrayal. The decision split opinion then, and it still does today. So, in summary, we saw where the British had solved one side of the puzzle by agreeing a deal with the Leeward Maroons, led by Kodjo of the Maroons. This wasn't a universal deal. All Maroons weren't in agreement. We simply saw where a part of the condition of this treaty was to eradicate the very thing that the Maroons swore to uphold and protect, which was freedom, and freedom for all. And this treaty ensured that the Maroons gained their freedom. But what of the rest of Jamaica? But now that we have answered question 4, join us to answer question 5. And what were the impacts and consequences of this treaty journey? Impacts and consequences of the treaty were simple. The treaty ensured the survival of Maroon communities. Places like a compound still exist today, living proof of that agreement. The Maroons preserved traditions, culture, and a form of independence that few others achieved under colonial rule. In that sense, they were heroes. They fought, they survived, and they secured freedom. But the treaty also tied them to the colonial system. By agreeing to return runaways, they became a part of the machinery that kept slavery in place. And that is where the controversy lies. Were they protecting their people, or simply abandoning others? History does not forgive a simple answer, because both things can be true at the same time. The Maroons represent resistance, but one could say they also had compromised. Victory, but also limitation. And maybe that's the real story. Not heroes or traitors, but survivors. In summary, based on the aforementioned, the next time we ask the question, is the Maroons heroes or traitors? I think the more appropriate question would be to ask yourself, what would you do to survive? Now, if you have reached this far in this video, it simply means that you or someone you know is interested in videos like these. Please leave a like, a share, a comment, do subscribe. Join us for the next one in Questions History.